Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with the Wise Mothman, a +1/+1 counters, mill, and maybe rad counters deck. A very cool idea, something I really like. This is one of our donation decks of the week, coming from Kaibur, who says, "Howdy. It's been a while since I've submitted a deck, and with the release of the new Mutants Menace deck, I thought it would be interesting to build a deck around it. My problem is, I don't know which commander to build around, so instead of making difficult decisions, I figure it would be easier if you made them for me." So they created two different decks, one for the Wise Mothman and the other one for the Master Transcendent. This week we'll look at the Wise Mothman, and the next week we'll look at the Master Transcendent. I'm gonna tell you right now, Master Transcendent has to be really good for me to like it more than this. I love this deck. As Kaibur says, the first one is the Wise Mothman. It feels like the most powerful commander, at least on paper, and the easier to build. The main idea is +1/+1 counter, mill, radiation, counters, proliferate. Just a lot of slashes there. Strategy where we mill our opponents, preferably with rad counters, then buff up our boys and girls and everyone with the Mothman and proliferate, so we get even more mill and even more radiation. There's also a side strategy with creatures that can copy the Mothman, so we get a bit more protection on him and double up our +1/+1 counters, or our whole engine, I will say. Overall, I feel like this is a pretty good deck. I hope you can see what you're able to add to it. I do have things to add to it, but I will admit, this is a really good deck. I really like this. This is the exact kind of deck I would build, and nothing has gotten me more looking at one of these Fallout commanders than the Wise Mothman. But let's go and find out what this commander is all about and get back to it right after that. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is the Wise Mothman, and why are they our Sultai, +1/+1 counter, rad counter, and mill commander? What a mouthful. The Wise Mothman is a 4-mana black, green, blue insect mutant, 3/3 flying. They have two abilities, one of which is a Titan ability, triggers on ETB or attacks. Each player gets a rad counter, we'll get to that in a second. And then, whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. So this is really interesting because the second ability, which is what we'll focus on and we'll look at rad counters after, is one of those cards that both cares about the number you mill, but cares more about the number of times you mill, if that makes sense. So large number of mills give us more targets to put +1/+1 counters, but smaller amounts of mills more frequently will put more +1/+1 counters on fewer creatures. Does that make sense? It's kind of tricky, and I think you want to find a nice little medium, but I think overall it's pretty good to get this, and pretty easy to get this on, let's say, X being 3 regularly. That's what I would personally aim for. I know there could be you could use traumatize and things like that, and mill 30 cards and put a +1/+1 counter on 30 creatures, but I find that really hard to actually have those 30 creatures in a deck like this. So I think I would lean to milling 3 and doing it often. And if you have more creatures than that, we're going to aim to mill a little more. But what are rad counters? I asked this myself when I saw this commander because I didn't really look at the Fallout stuff, and yeah, so radiation is at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, so when sagas usually trigger, if you have any rad counters, mill that many cards. For each non-land card you mill this way, you lose 1 life and a rad counter. So this is kind of interesting. It's like a delayed mill that goes away if it reaches, if it does the thing it wants to. What I mean by that is if it just mills lands, the rad counter doesn't go away and they have to do it again next turn. But if it doesn't mill lands, it will drain some life and the rad counter will heal itself in a way. This is kind of interesting because we really don't want our opponents to be milling non-land cards. Sorry, we don't want them to mill land cards, I should say. Because even though they keep the radiation, it does nothing with our commander. So we're just generally going to try to ensure that they're milling. We just want it to hit non-land cards, I guess it's to say. And as a reminder, with the Titan effect, on ETB and attack, each player gets 1. 1 is not a lot. We generally want it to be a little higher than that, And with that in mind, even though the Wise Mothman is a good setup for mill, I like the second ability more, and I would like them to lean on our deck for more milling. Looking at the deck itself, it's just great, honestly. I think it already almost has everything I want, and I think is good in a deck like this. Namely, we've got a lot of really good early mana. We've got some proliferate. We have notably Winding Constrictor, to double the counters that go on our opponents or all players. So we got overall just a lot of really good cards. Now, there's a few places I want to kind of point out. So first, actually before I do that, looking at the curve, I just want to take note that the curve is really nice. The Great Henge is reduced in mana cost, so it's not 9 mana. And then we kind of end at 6. 4 is a bit high, but I don't think too high of a number in a deck like this. There are a few 4 mana cards that I'd like to cut, but we're also at 36 lands, which feels fine with the mana dorks. So let's talk about cards that immediately catch my attention and I'm not too interested in. So let's start with things like, honestly, the Master Transcendent. Even though this is going to be our commander for the next set, this feels kind of a clumsy card, right? It's really, really hyper specific. It does give one player 2 rad counters, and then it reanimates a card that was milled, but it is a tap ability, not a triggered ability, and therefore we have to go through a turn cycle. I find that to be too clumsy. The Master is definitely not as strong as Mothman, and definitely in a Mothman deck feels kind of weak. Likewise, there was another one, Marcus Mutant Mare, also feels just a little okay. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, if that creature has a +1/+1 counter, you draw a card. If not, put a +1/+1 counter on it. I feel like this is just a little too clumsy. I think I would just rather, Guardian Project style cards, or I don't know if we're playing Guardian. We're not playing Guardian Project. Or who's our legendary squirrel? I can never remember their name, but the one that says whenever our creatures deal damage, draw cards. Just play that instead. We're paying an additional mana and additional color for not that much of a better effect, and one that can be easily removed as a 4/4. So I'm not too much of a fan of Marcus. I think I would cut them as well. I think our other general mutants that we have here are very good. Bloatfly even, I don't mind. Glowing One is fine. I think a lot of these are just, they're good. They're not anything too amazing, but they're good. Vexing Radgall gives proliferate. Okay, also very, very nice. Big fan of a lot of these cards. I think they're good. Some place I want to be a little more, strict on is definitely our mana. We have really good mana. I don't think we need this many mana rocks. We have Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and then we have the full talismans. And I think I'd rather just one of them being Felwar Stone, and then we get rid of the other 2. Even though I do see, we're a 4 mana commander, we want to get our commander out, this is really important. We are really good with 3 mana dorks, and a very low to the ground deck. I really think if we just go to the Felwar Stone and cut the rest, we're not going to have mana problems, and our deck won't get a little too clunky because of it. Meanwhile, we also have Palantir, which I feel is just still a little too cute. I do like the mill. I don't know, I'm really hard on this card. I know it looks good, but every time I see it, I think it's just fine. It's like a mix of a lot of okay abilities that your opponents will eventually just start ignoring. And yeah, for a while we might say there's that question of mill or not mill, and how that mill works with your commander. But at a certain number, your opponents are just going to go, hey, just draw the card. This is just kind of like Phyrexian Arena, except for it's more likely to be destroyed as an artifact. So with that in mind, I don't like it. In this deck, it's competing with Necropotence and Rhystic Study on that power level, and it doesn't outscale those cards. Recon Craft Theta feels just a little cute, as honestly a proliferating creature. It's 4 mana, it does come with a creature with a +1/+1 counter, but it's 4 mana. It's the same mana cost as our commander. I don't want this. I think this is particularly clumsy in comparison to the rest of the deck. Not the one, was it the One Ring? I was sure there was something else at 4 mana that I was looking to be a bit harder on, but at the moment I can't see it. Okay, the rest of the deck looks really good. I will make a lot of suggestions, I think, and there's not that much room for so many of these suggestions, so I think if you wanted to go further, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots can be removed. Altar of the Brood can be removed, but I'm suggesting a very... Yeah, this is better. This is better than the card I was going to suggest, so play this, that's fine. I think let's just go through the cards that I want to add and see what we can do. So the first one that comes to mind is Hedron Crab. I think Hedron Crab and its cousin, oh, that's where, usually that one's the first one. So Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab are definitely cards I think belong in this deck. They work in different ways. Hedron Crab notably can mill yourself for your reanimation strategies, which I particularly like, and Ruin Crab mills all your opponents. Both of these cards are just very, very good, better with fetch lands, but what I like about them is they're both low mana 0/2 and 0/3 creatures that will grow through the Mothman and become threats later. It's the same reason I like all the mana dorks in this deck, because they work really, really well with the commander. Useful as a utility creature at first and a beater later. So I feel like these are very, very easy additions, especially because they keep the mana cost low. And there's another low mana cost creature later, but I'm not as convinced. Arwen, Weaver of Hope, I just kind of like this because I think I wouldn't mind 1 or 2 ways to generically put +1/+1 counters on all of your creatures, and Arwen by far I think feels the strongest. If you wanted something else, I think you can do that as well, but at the moment, playing Arwen turn 2 off of Mana Dork, and then getting Wise Mothman out and growing Arwen, you're going to do very, very well. It's going to be very, very strong. Even in other situations, I think Arwen is going to be very powerful, and even if she's removed after a few attacks, it doesn't matter because she has done her job, and you can start proliferating all those counters. Another one in 3 mana that really caught my eye was Kami of Whispered Hopes. Now this is just another +1/+1 counter doubler, but I really do like that it adds mana of any one color equal to its power, so it's a mana dork and a utility, counter doubler. In addition, even further to the fact that it will become a beater. So I really like this mix. Like, it's just another mana dork I'd like to play. And at 3 mana, you can cast this mana dork on the second turn, and you're already getting really, really far. So very big fan of this. I think this one's very strong and worth playing. Consuming Aberration also caught my eye. This one is maybe a little clunky, but if you lean on your mana dorks a little more, I like this more, because if we're able to generate a lot of mana, we're going to get a lot of triggers off of Consuming Aberration by casting several spells. And I will say, out of all of these cards, Consuming Aberration represents the most chance of actually milling an opponent out. And I know I said earlier, like, we want smaller mills repeatedly, and this does do that, but with enough mills, Consuming Aberration can actually mill out players, or mill players to the point that they're in a lot of trouble, or mana screw them, or anything like that. And so with that in mind, I find this to be very, very strong in a deck like this, especially if you can use it on, like, cast it and immediately cast like 2 or 3 creatures or 2 or 3 spells. You're going to be very, very happy. I like this a lot more than, like, there's a Marcus Mutant Mayor or whatever. I find this better at 5-drop. It gets really, really big. If you put 1 +1/+1 counter on it, you don't have to worry about Rest in Peace effects destroying it, and you can keep it around and get a few more triggers. So this feels like a really easy inclusion for sure. It does actually make me think, maybe I should have done a bit more of a job. One of the things that's hard about these cards is that a lot of the conversations online, EDH Rec, all these places, they use a lot of the set cards from because they use the pre-con basically. It's hard to see at this point, with the card being so fresh, what other ideas that we had. You might go, like, what other ideas that might be had to go in different directions. Sorry. Finishing sentences before I finish them. And something I think when I see Consuming Aberration, it reminds me of the blue-black horror precon. I actually own that, which is part of the reason I remember that. And I do rather think that there's probably some overlap between these two strategies, namely because they both have kind of a side, I was going to say hustle, a side interest in milling while being aggro decks. And I think, therefore, if after this, I might take another look, and I would recommend to you, look through those cards as well, see if anything catches your eye. Speaking of eyes, Eye Collector is an interesting kind of, creature version of a mill a turn. I really, really like that it has flying. This is the big thing I like about it. Every time it deals damage to a player, everyone mills, that's another trigger. But I think it's just really notable that it has evasion. Like, I really like Ruin Crab, I really like Hedron Crab, but Eye Collector having evasion is just going to make a big difference, I think. And it's going to bring in so much damage against your opponents. So this is something I like. It also goes along with the theme of like Thrumming Bird and the like, that are just evasive beaters that have like another trigger incoming, and I do really, really like that. So this is particularly strong. Dread Summons is another one that I really, really like. I didn't see this anywhere or people talking about it. Maybe I should have looked better, but when I saw this got me. This this is the one, right? Because the way this works is perfect. Not only is this a mass mill card, right? It also kind of both creates the creatures to put the counters on and creates the method to count that many creatures, right? Because in order to get, let's say, 20 zombies, you have to mill 20 creature cards, which are notably non-land cards, which means whatever 2/2s you get from Dread Summons, every single one of them will get a +1/+1 counter if your commander is out, guaranteed. That's not including all the other triggers you'll get that you can put +1/+1 counters on your other creatures. Now, it is definitely a, jam a ton of mana into the spell kind of spell, but like I think even at 5 mana, each opponent, like remember I said mill 3 is enough? This is definitely one that mill 3 is enough. Ideally, you can get like 5 or 6 zombies, and then hopefully 4 additional triggers in order to get all of, that might be a bit, let's say 4 zombies, 4 triggers to immediately get all your board +1/+1 and 4 new creatures. I think this is very good. And once you get to those ridiculous power levels, like with the Kami where you can tap for like 6-7 mana, this just gets ridiculous. I think this one is very, very good, and I think it works very, very well. As we're in green-black, I gotta point out Life and Death, as I always do. Life and Death is one of my favorite cards. It is reanimate from your side of the battlefield, and it is also 20 cents. So if you are playing at a budget of any kind, or this deck is definitely not a budget deck, but I just wanted to note to anyone else coming here, Life and Death is the cheapest reanimate you will ever get, just for twice the mana and only your side of the battlefield. So you're playing decks that are under $100, under $50, Life and Death in black-green is there for you. It is also notable that, once again, this happens rarely, but life is actually, the life side is actually really, really interesting, because with the way your deck works, you can grow those lands incredibly quickly. And so at a certain point, when you're really, really far in the game, you have Life and Death and you have no reanimation targets, which is hard to believe, but it could happen. You could cast Life, all your lands become creatures, none of them are summoning sick, you do some milling, they all grow, proliferate, attack your opponents, win the game. Is that Magic Christmas Land? Yeah, but I thought I would mention it anyways. Now let's talk about the last 2 editions, where I want to talk about something that's a little less budget friendly. And that's Walking Ballista and Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Look at that. Do I ever suggest cards at that price? I don't think I do. That's ridiculous. So that's like about what? This version is about $15. Let's say if you don't want that art, $15 to $20, and then about $50 to $60. So I want to say this as clear as I can. If you are playing with friends and you want to play these cards, proxy them. Always proxy. Have a great time. This is a game you play with your friends. This is a board game 99% of the time. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Have fun. If you would like to own these cards, actually, and you can afford them and maybe you can trade for them, sure, do it. Especially if you're supporting your LGS or anything like that, that's great. But for me, absolutely, if you like these and you're scared of the monetary cost proxy. Otherwise, if you can afford these cards are insane in this deck. Both of them do so much work. Obviously, Walking Ballista is just a beast of a card, and actually, there's the... trying to remember what it's called, some kind of automation where every time you remove 2 +1/+1 counters, you draw a card. That's an option too, but not in the same power level. Walking Ballista turns all of these +1/+1 counters into a direct player removal option. And if you have the means for it, this is going to be amazing. And its flip side, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, may be one of the strongest cards for this deck, period. It represents so much. Not only is it fantastic as it does something with +1/+1 counters and creature abilities, and you know, especially if you use this on Walking Ballista, you get so much advantage. It also works off of mill. Like, its main strategy is the fact that you are taking advantage of the milled cards to collect targets to throw in the cauldron. Phenomenal card. I felt like I couldn't do this video without mentioning it, but I am aware this is an expensive card and an expensive addition to a deck like this. Then finally, I wanted to put in my fun card at a much lower, monetary cost. My fun card for this deck is Song of Freyalise. Song of Freyalise is a card I universally think is undervalued in tokens, +1/+1 counters, and generally green decks that go wide. And it's just 2 turns of mana dorks into a 3rd turn with a +1/+1 counter. Now, that first half I think is really good for the deck, and this +1/+1 counter part isn't as important, but it's that last part that really means a lot to this deck. I was trying to find a way to maybe suggest an overrun effect, Triumph of the Hordes kind of stuff, and I couldn't pick one that I felt was right. And then I thought of this and I was like, okay, this is perfect. The Vigilance Trample is really what you want here, and mainly the Trample. There's going to be a point in the game that you have such good board presence, but the evasion is just missing. And Song of Freyalise is going to be phenomenal for this, right? All your creatures get Trample, they attack in, and all of a sudden you'll defeat all your opponents. It gives you something to work towards. It gives you a bunch of extra mana on turns that you're just building up, especially if you can play like Hedron Crab into Song of Freyalise, turn 2, then tap the Hedron Crab for Ruin Crab or something. Like, it just like propels you forward in a way your mana rocks really don't. So this one really, really catches my eye as being incredibly powerful. Of course, as people also know, these counters can also be proliferated. So late game, if you have the means, you can play this, go to 1, proliferate twice to 3, and immediately get that finale, and get that attack in. So there's a card I really, really like, even though I think it feels a little weaker than it is. And those are my additions. Honestly, I feel like this episode flew by. I really, really like this deck, and I think it's mostly built already. It's incredibly strong, and it looks, if nothing else, incredibly fun to play. Like, this is the exact kind of deck I would play. I personally would probably cut down on the number of what I would say is all these Universes Beyond cards if I could, because I personally don't like them, but some of them are just really, really strong. Both Screeching Scorch Beast and Mirelurk Queen, even the Feral Ghoul. These cards that work with rad counters you can't really get rid of, but that depends on you. I think I would personally try to find a way to get rid of them, as it's how I am, but as the deck is, I think it's so strong. So it's going to be really hard for me to look at the Master Transcendent next week and find a reason to pick it over it, but I'm not going to make my decision yet. I want to see what we can do with them. But for now, honestly, I heavily recommend this commander, just looking at it. And I've been kind of itching for a black-green +1/+1 commander, and this is definitely the one that's catching my eye right now, because that's just such an interesting collection of cards. So all right, I hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and good luck and good deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.